First of all, let me know if you can hear me. Though I ask if I'd like to sit, I'll tell you in a minute. I found out a moment ago that I was supposed to stand here and say a few words. I'm reminded of my dear friend Don Baxter saying, "Don't get Jenkins started talking about the organ." It's like taking the finger out of the dike. He'll go on ad infinitum. Nevertheless, coming back to this place, I can't help but think maybe I have the record of living in this room more than any living human being. I spent 37 years teaching at Stetson, and 32 years out of that 37, I spent in this room. There wasn't much reason to spend the other 5 years in this room. There wasn't much to inspire me, I'm afraid, those first 5 years. That was the time that an electronic instrument was housed here. That brings back some memories also. Particularly at breakfast this morning, I sat with Delray Hitchcock. There was an electronic situated in the room, and the speakers were housed in the old Woodbury Cove organ case, which was situated on the stage here. And you can imagine the sounds that emanated from that case. Not very pleasant. So, we avoided it pretty much as possible. The times that we had to deal with it produced some interesting experiences. It had reached the point, and it was not very old, but you never knew exactly what to expect. I see this strange look coming over Jack Jones' face, and Del Hitchcock, even more curious expressions. I'll never forget one day Del was performing very beautifully the Bach G Fugue. She was dancing along, having a great time, and suddenly the electronic machine decided to take a turn for the worse. It sputtered and spewed, and finally Del gave up, threw her hands up, and said, in her typical Georgia drawl, "Folks, we seem to have lost the power." And so we discovered the way to correct the situation. You had to take a stop and jiggle it, and it would make all these strange sounds, and suddenly it would boom out. She picked up the pieces and continued to play the jig fugue. Well, I had to play it on the, I suppose you'd call it an instrument, for chapel one day, and I knew I should not tamper with the registration I had chosen. The last verse of this hymn I was playing, I should have left well enough alone. Then I decided I'll push this and and changed the registration before playing the last verse. But I punched the piston, and I could feel it behind me. The congregation took a breath, and I came down on the last verse, and nothing came out. And the verse, and the congregation, anyway, I kicked the sheet, and suddenly this tremendous sound came forth, and away we went on the last verse. Well, the day came when this instrument arrived, and you can well believe what a joy it was to see the electronic depart. That was indeed a wonderful occasion. I think back to that occasion. All of this you can read in the little brochure that Janice, my wife, encouraged me to put together. She said, you went through the experience of putting the organ purchase together. You talked long and hard to encourage the purchase of that organ, but I could not have succeeded in that without the great, great help of various individuals. Chief among them was Don Yaxman, who was acting dean at that time, a dear, dear friend, a dear man. He was a trombone teacher and acting dean of the music school. Those of you who knew him know that there was no human being on this planet who was like him. There never will be another. A marvelous fellow. You can read all about Don in that book entitled Recollections. By the way, before Charles Nazarian gives his talk about the organ case, please read the beautiful article that he permitted us to include in the brochure. Please read that. It will be much more meaningful. His talk will be much more meaningful, I'm sure, if you will read that. It is beautifully written. And I'm sure you'll have some questions after you read it. That will be ammunition for Charles. Charles, would you stand? Once you read that article, you will understand the true artistry of this gentleman. You can't believe all of the work that went into producing what you see in front of you. It's incredible. I've read the article time and time again, and each time I read it, I just marvel at what he achieved. Before I forget it, would the members of the organ class stand? I would like to know how many of you. I've seen so many of you just in the last 12 verses hours. Gee, that is wonderful. Sing the afterwards if you would. I was told just a few moments ago that I was supposed to stand up here and talk a little. I've been trying to think in the last half hour, what am I supposed to talk about? I'll try not to bore you. I've been thinking, why did we happen to choose this organ? We were launching out really into a new venture in organ building. There weren't many mechanical action organs around at the time this was built. It was a return to an earlier form of organ action. We were going back to a type of action that had been used in earlier times. I had occasion to work with mechanical action earlier in my organ training, and in Europe they had started into this particular venture, and it was only after the Second World War that it began to return to the American scene. You can read about it in the little booklet that I prepared, so I won't repeat what is in there. You can read it, but I might mention the things that it taught me in the years that I experienced this instrument. So much of it was an experience that I had as a result of my teaching, as a result of what my students taught me. It was a joint venture, really. I remember, well, let me back up a minute. I think back to something that David Bowie said so many years ago. I don't know whether it was original with David or not, but it always stuck with me. His idea of wind under the fingers, and I might add to that, under the feet as well. The touch under the keys of a mechanical action organ, you feel the wind because there's a direct connection between the key and the palate in the chest, which has a wind under it. It's so closely related to the feel of the harpsichord. You have that pluck. In the harpsichord, there's a feeling of the pluck of the plectrum. When you touch the key, you are plucking the string by the plectrum. So it is with the mechanical action organ, with a good mechanical action. You feel a pluck with the overcoming of the pressure of the wind under the palate. You almost have to have a diagram, and the best, of course, is the feel of the key itself. But you have to have the wind on. The wind has to be supplied, and you feel that pluck. It was always a joy, the limited experience I had with mechanical action. There was a joy of feeling a oneness with what you were doing, as opposed to, and don't confuse this with electronic ordinance, which is an entirely different situation. I'm speaking of pipe ordinance with electric action when I speak of electric action. That is a situation where you make an electrical contact at the keyboard, and the rest is done for you electrically. But, in other words, there's no feel to the key. It's just a matter of opening the valve in the chest electrically. But in a case such as we have here, there's a direct connection between the key and the valve. My students all know this, or at least after 4 years here, or 2 years, or whatever. So there's a oneness with what you're doing musically. You feel the opening of the valve, and by the same token, you learn that there's a relationship in the closing of the valve. There's a relationship there. I'll never forget one day. I forget who the student was, but the student was playing and came to the end of the piece, and I said, "Play that again." I noticed that there was a difference in the resonance of the room, the way the student was ending the piece. And we experimented a little, and it made a difference in the way that student was closing the valve. It wasn't just a matter of lifting the hands from the key. It made a difference in the resonance of the sound. It was a soft resonance. It was a soft ending, rather than just ram. So it's not only a matter of the feeling of the sound beginning, but it also had to do with the ending of the sound. Whereas with electric action, it opens the same way all the time, it closes all the way all the time. So you have that wonderful connection with the opening and closing of the valve. And therefore, it affects the rhythm, it affects the musicality of what you're doing. It's that added oneness with making music. You can argue this back and forth until you experience it and live with it. It's hard to explain. So, I made my argument. Those of you who have experienced it know what I'm talking about, I'm sure. And it's frustrating when you don't have that available to you. Trying to think of something else to talk about. That's my strongest point. It's something that you live with, and it's something that when you don't have it available to you when you perform, you really miss it. Yes, ma'am. What is your name? This was, of course, before emails and quick communication. It had to do with just letter writing and trying to communicate with Germany about this small point and wait for a response, and things could get kind of lost in the shuffle. So finally it worked out that Mr. Von Becker was working on his largest instrument. In Montreal, he was finishing it. And I thought, well, this is an opportunity to communicate one-on-one. So, we were young at that time, and I think there were four of Jack, five of us, yeah, who got in Mary Lawson's Chevrolet, crowded in, and took off from Montreal for the dedication of a magnificent organ, 5-man organ, 78 stops, I think. Jack was one of them, and Mary Lawson and Travis Plum and Judy Williams and TallPaul1 and Jack. I think that was it. Anyway, took off from Montreal. And this, of course, was before interstates. And off we went to Montreal, drove straight through to Montreal and to New York. And where would we land but where's Patty? And in New York,
let me tell it.
what? Patty?
It was one night and there was a knock on our door, our apartment door. And nobody ever knocked on it after dark. And I went to the door and that's who it was. And it was the same trip, it was the same day. And he said, we would like to take a shower in your shower. And we would like to go to dinner. And we're willing to pay up to $250. And so they all took a shower, and then we went to the red something, brick wall or something like that, where you got Smorgasbord down in the village. And they ate. Then they all came and played on the organ at James Chapel at Union Seminary. Then at about 11 o'clock at night, they got back in whoever's car, and off they went to Montreal. That's my version.
Well, it was a welcome visit. Unannounced. And they have hated me ever since. But little did we know at the time that Bob Ford would be a future faculty member. But dearly beloved faculty member. So we kept driving that night. Ended up somewhere in upstate New York, I think. And then continued driving the next day and finally arrived in Montreal the next evening. And overslept the next morning, and Baccarat was furious. We had overslept and had access to the organ the next morning for about an hour, which was a thrilling experience, of course. And then Andre Marchal and Monsieur Jean-Louis gave a joint recital for the next day's dedication. Then, fortunately, I had a nice conference with Gilton Becker and worked out a few minor details, but at least I had a face-to-face conference with him. And it paid off. But what a trip. Then we drove straight through, back to Florida. Not today. It was bad enough driving in segments to Oklahoma, believe me. But it was a trip to remember, I'll say that. So, makes me think of some of the trips that we took to Europe. There were 4 trips that we made to Europe. I made 2 of them alone. After those 2, I swore I'd never do it alone. Janice had to go in to preserve my sanity. One particular, I've got 2 minutes, I think. one particular moment I remember, we reached the Simplon Pass. We were passing from France, I suppose it was, down into Italy. And it was Pentecost weekend. All the Italian people were heading home to Italy. All the Italian people were heading north to France. So we wanted to make sure that we got there on time to catch the train. So you had to park your car, we were in a van, and so we wanted to get on. So